All right, we are now live streaming on YouTube. So tell all your friends, everybody. And I better close the window or I'll be distracted by it. Need to stop sharing my screen so that I can actually do some other things. I hid the live streaming YouTube window and now I hear everything 30 seconds later. I have to close it so I don't hear it all.
So Scott, is Chris supposed to be a panelist? He put something in the chat. I can't seem to get on.
Good question.
Yeah,
I
sure.
didn't see him there. Chris Kaiser, yeah. I think he beats some of the other guys that are
For those who are listening, if you're not going to Black Hat next week, come find Michelle and I. We'll both be out there.
Indeed, yeah. I keep
Awesome.
forgetting.
And you're also doing Sands in August, aren't you, Fleetus?
I am.
Busy.
Virtually. I
Oh,
won't.
you're just doing the virtual? You're not going down for real?
Yeah. I don't need to go to Vegas twice in the same year.
Yeah, I'm going to San Francisco after Vegas just so I can kind of chill after Vegas because it's quite intense.
I always joke. I only need 2-3 days tops in Vegas, unless you're locking me in a room for 8 hours a day. Then I can make it for a full week. Other than that, 2 days is all I need in Vegas.
Yeah, I've done a full week twice when I've been working and volunteering and stuff, and it's a lot. But weirdly you don't really get tired because of all the oxygen they pump around the place. I think that's why. Anyway, I could be lying.
Yeah. No, it's totally oxygen.
It's a very strange place, and there's a lot of meetings and things. It's strange because everybody's kind of walking around with their their drinks and the partying and stuff. But when you're there for more professional reasons, it's a strange environment to be in. But then security is a strange environment to be in generally. So
yeah, in general, yes. Yeah. I don't.
Nothing about what we do is ever normal. So.
All right, we're almost ready to go. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
And I finally got rid of the 30-second delayed echo in my head, which was coming from my Microsoft Edge browser that I didn't know I had open to the streaming channel listening. So everything should be good now. And just before we kick off officially, thanks everybody for joining us. And if you're able to, please enter in the chat where you're coming in from around the world today. Some people have already started, but it's really nice to be able to sort of go through that and let people know where we're all coming from. So I think without any further delay, I'm going to start this session. Actually, I'll just share my screen first so that we can, actually, no, I won't. Now that we're ready to start, I will just go ahead. Okay, I will do a quick countdown and then we will start doing some intro stuff. So 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. We're in session number 24, and it's great to have so many people joining us, quite a few panelists today, and it's a fun topic. We're going to talk about timely news stories and anecdotes for security awareness. So we're going to talk about some stories, but we're also going to talk about the process of how we use those stories to educate people. And so really happy to have our panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a minute, but we'll do a little bit of housekeeping first. Let me share my screen and let me know. Yeah, you guys should be able to see my screen now. The first thing I'll mention is we record these sessions and they're available on our YouTube channel. In fact, this one today is streaming. We did that last time and it seemed to work okay. A couple of features we don't get that easily, which are some overlays where I like to put the poll results up, but it might actually work this time because I think I got the setting right. So hopefully that'll work out for everybody if they want to share this with people afterwards, or if you have to drop off and want to catch the rest of the session. It'll be available very soon on YouTube on the live tab of the ClickArmor YouTube channel. We also take full transcripts of the session and create a condensed blog post on our website at ClickArmor, where ClickArmor brings us these sessions. And it's helpful for people to kind of zero in on some of the valuable comments that people have made. And we also take those things every 3 months and put them into a document we call a Security Awareness Industry Report, and put some highlighted comments and things that we've found, trends and things like that. So it's hopefully very useful for people overall in whatever form you want to consume them. The general agenda we go through, it's an hour long. Most people stay the whole time, which is great. I think that means we're hopefully providing value to people. But the process generally is we start by doing a few poll questions for all the audience, and we'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves and then maybe make a comment on the poll questions and results. And then we'll get into some open-ended questions where we talk about general ideas, trends, and things that people have seen successful or not successful, recommendations. And that's where everybody, gets a chance to contribute their ideas in the chat. Actually welcome people to ask questions and make comments on other people's questions and comments as well. And then at the end, we'll do a bit of a roundup on what are the key insights for people like executives, if you're trying to communicate some of these things to the high level people in your organization, as well as those who are probably here trying to implement things. And just if you're here for your own personal interest, some tips that you might be able to make use of. So we try and summarize those things towards the end, and we'll announce our next session date and time. Partway through, we'll do a little bit of a pitch for ClickArmor just to give you an idea of who it is that's sponsoring this series and what we do. So with that in mind, I'm just going to do a really quick review of people who have joined us from different places. We have Ryan, you'll hear from in a minute, from Ramara, Ontario. Chris Kaiser is from Calgary. We got John Scott, not sure where he's from, if we put it in later, but Kim from the GTA. What's that?
He's in London, isn't he? He's one of ours.
Oh, that's good. Cool.
I think that's the same John Scott. I'm not sure.
It may well be. I can't remember off the top of my head from some of the posts I've seen. I can't remember where he's from. Chris from Tampa Bay, Karen from Ottawa, Dylan from Barrie, Ontario. So lots of great variety and where people are coming from. Really appreciate that. So what I'll do now is introduce our poll questions. And you know what? I've actually neglected to create the the usual poll that we have. So all my planning to get this the polls shared were in vain. So we're just going to ask people to type in their answers to these things if it's not too inconvenient, and hopefully we'll get the same value out of that. But the three questions we're asking are: what is your preferred type of news story for security news source for security stories? So we actually asked this on our LinkedIn post a week or two ago, and I modified it a little bit. But there's mainstream news, security portals. There are podcasts, which I forgot to put in the post. Actually, I didn't have a lot of room because they don't give you many options or a lot of space in each field. So I included podcasts in the security portals. But podcasts, I think, deserve to be on their own. Social sites like Reddit and Twitter, newsletters, etc. So I'm going to ask people to kind of type in their answers to these. And at the same time, while you're doing that, I'm going to ask our panelists to do a quick intro. So I'll do Fleetus and then Michelle and then Chris and then Ryan. So Fleetus, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm Fleetus Poston. I'm a security operations manager at CrashPlan by day, security evangelist by evening, jokingly. I'm here just to add a security operations point of view. I think this topic is important today as we talk about how to take what you're learning in the news via these sessions and apply it back to the human-centric side of our organizations.
Thanks very much. Michelle?
Yeah, Fleetus is sounding like Batman there in the evenings. That's quite So I'm Michelle Leversley. I work with organizations to help them develop their security culture and education strategy. And I'm in London. And this is, like Fleetus says, this is a useful session because it's something we often forget in organizations, that we can use the news and relevant topics to give our insight as well. It's not just giving the news to people and explaining it, but it can help us communicate upwards as well with our insight and say, well, this is quite useful, or we don't need to be worried about this possibly this week. So yeah.
Possibly. Great. Thanks for joining us, Michelle, once again on the panel. And Chris Kaiser, I'm going to ask you to do a quick intro of yourself.
Sure. I'm Chris Kaiser. I'm president and founder of Cybercrime Analytics. We do consulting to companies, education, and a lot of expert witness work, and doing more and more of that. I was interested in today's session because I was very curious what the other panelists have to say and those that are attending. There's been a couple of events that have happened over the past 2 days related to cyber victimization that I became involved in that are quite concerning to me. One of the areas I'm doing more research on, I'm just starting another research paper right now, is in the issue of generations and different generations, how they're affected, how they're targeted, etc. And had a rather disturbing situation happen to a very close friend of mine who's in her early 80s, very bright, but that was one of the most creative cyber intrusions I've seen in a long time, and it multiplied over a couple of days. So cool. I wanted to hear what the other panelists are talking about, things that interest them, and I'll hopefully have an opportunity to share this story.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very intriguing. So we'll definitely get you on that one, Chris. Thanks a lot. And lastly, myself, Scott Wright. I'm the CEO of ClickArmor, and we created ClickArmor a few years ago after having taught security awareness for 15 years and did security consulting, risk management, and security policies before that. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about ClickArmor shortly, but we created this series of sessions about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and it's just sort of carried on. There's good momentum. We're growing in the number of people that are attending each session. So really happy that we're able to bring value for people, and really want to encourage people to enter questions and comments in the chat. If you have a story that you want to share, please chat, just indicate in the chat. We'll actually ask you to, if you want, come up and on the panel and tell us about it in your own words. So with that, let's go back to our poll questions. We had the question, what's your preferred type of news source for security stories? Mainstream security portals, podcasts, social sites, newsletters. Second poll question is, what do you use security news sources for? So do you do it for personal knowledge? Do you share with your leadership in your organization? Do you share it with your teams or employees? And or do you use it for inputs to plans like technical? Somebody's got Ryan did a good job of whipping up a poll here for us. The title of the poll is a little bit off. It's in industry statistics, but keep in mind this is all about stories and anecdotes. So I appreciate Ryan you whipping that little poll up for us. So it does cover these questions now. So you're free to enter. The panelists can't enter, but they should see the actual questions. So while we're waiting for people to respond, I'll just mention the last one, which is, in what form does your organization share stories? If you have collected them, are they put into training content, or are they done in regular newsletters? Are they more in the form of as needed bulletins or posters when people actually see a problem in your management, you say, we need to get this out to people as soon as possible? Or are there other modes that you use to communicate this stuff? And you can put those things in the chat as well. Or you might say, we don't share stories. So I see a number of people going in to respond. So maybe I'll turn it back to the panel and just ask your thoughts on these questions. These poll questions we typically create to be closed-ended. So there's a few finite number of answers, and we kind of comment on the distribution of the responses and what we expect that distribution to be, and then we'll get into more opinions around the value of some of these things as we go into the open-ended questions. So anybody have comments on the poll questions at this point?
So I'll jump in real quick. Similar to what Stephen just said, I set up an RSS feed into a Slack channel for my security team, as well as others who have interest, just to subscribe to. So 24/7, there's news articles coming in that they can review. We also use those articles, as I said, from the security operations side to do some OSINT, to go look for things that are targeted to our vendors that we can communicate to. If it's personal stuff, we can push back. And it allows us to take those indicators that we get and apply them back to our controls, as well as just to circumvent and publish to an all channel. Hey, you may have read this today. Here's how it affects us. Here's how it affects you. And here's how it could affect your family and friends. So we apply all three levels of internal, employee, and then family and friends.
That's cool. What kind of feedback do you get on that, Fleetus? Is it generally good?
So I've slowly added more to the business. Right now, it's predominantly my security org, some IT, and then a handful of our support staff who are like our TAMs and PS who want to hear it just so when they get questions. So far, it's been good. I'm advertising it more with our awareness team that anyone and everyone is welcome to put it in there. And then we have a dedicated security culture / awareness channel where we also cross post articles and put polls and stuff in there to apply this. So answering both question 1 and question 2 on your slide.
That's awesome. Michelle.
Yeah, so once again, I completely agree with Fleetus. I've seen it really well used in organizations where you've had an RSS, which is great, or just somebody somewhere just regularly feeds in news updates, and you've got kind of a ticker or an update on the InfoSec site or something else, but also in the way that you can communicate it outwards to your cyber targeted groups or your champions. Those are often really good way. They're often quite keen and quite interested to share those. And then it's more to communicate it upwards. It's much more been a case of going out to the security team, in my experience, and saying, hey, these are the news articles that I've seen. Maybe there's 3 that I've seen that I think might be pertinent. Or this was discussed on this podcast, even, because I find the execs love podcasts. And if you've got anything, that's fine. I can reword it, but give me your insight on these. Is there anything you want to talk about? And then we communicate that up. That's also been very successful because it feels like you are showing that you have your finger on the pulse a bit more, and that you're able to give them insight that they can then use outwardly as well when they're using. But to the point about cybercrime, I think it's really, really important that we do increasingly talk about this, but in a sensitive way, because we can scare people and we don't want to scare them, but we do want to keep them informed. And there's a lot in the news at the moment. Things are really evolving quite quickly. And I think the risks to private individuals are actually increasing unfortunately, as much as they are to organizations. And I think that's really important to get to people.
Do you actually share things that are useful to people personally in that mode as well?
Yeah, I find that my slightly controversial opinion, and I'm happy to speak if people disagree, but my opinion is that nowadays, with all the workforce optimization, aka layoffs, I think people are, and just the way the pandemic took us through, I think people know that they're quite disposable to organizations. And I think the olden days, in 2016 or 2015, where you could say, oh, well, you've got to protect the organization. I honestly don't think people are buying into that as much. I think they will want to protect things because otherwise they won't get paid or anything else. But I don't think they have the same level of allegiance. Whereas I think they do very much relate to it if it's made pertinent to them. And I think the levels of crime that we're getting the levels of crime we're getting that are affecting private individuals, even on a very small level, you might only be losing $100, or it might be, I don't think $1,000 is a small amount at all, but it could be relatively small, but it's a lot when it's done but to 10,000 people or 100 people. And that's happening to my knowledge, that seems to be happening a lot more than it would have been before, because everybody needs money. So I think we need to, it's a very difficult message to get out. But I think if people can see it in the news and they can see it there, and then you kind of make it a bit more human, it helps. So
perfect. Chris, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Cletus and Michelle. I'm not as involved directly, if you will, in the kinds of work you're doing, but I just had a meeting with one of the law enforcement agencies in Canada, and we were talking about the IT aspects of cyber hacks. There was a police force in Canada a couple of weeks ago that was just hit their police agency and had to pay some ransomware, and it's sort of an ongoing thing of critical organizations, police, fire, ambulance, et cetera, are easy targets. And one of the big problems they have is budgetary problems where they don't have proper backup and they don't do things. But to the point of the questions, what I find is when I quiz these organizations about what security measures do you have and how do you share information, how you do this, most of them say we have policies. I dig a little deeper and try to find out just how much they're actually used. And I think organizations are going to find very quickly, because I do a lot of work peripherally in the cyber insurance side, that from an insurance standpoint, these companies are no longer going to be able to just say, well, we have policies and procedures. They're going to dig deeper and say, well, you've been hit. What have you been doing to actually use these and implement them, et cetera? But to the other point, because I do so much work in social engineering and that side of it, when the question came up, industry statistics, what's your preferred type of news source for security stories? My first choice was mainstream news, which may seem odd to the panel, but it's what stories are getting reported, how are they getting reported, and how much does that raise the awareness of the individual, to Michelle's point, of how vulnerable they really are. And I think it's a very difficult challenge we face of working with organizations and working with individuals. And too often we separate them as two totally separate beings, remembering that an organization is a group of people. So, the fact that it's not like when they go to work mentally, they become something different. It's still the same mindset of how they use computers, how they use social media, how they communicate, what they click on, what they don't click on. They'll do that at work or elsewhere. The only difference, to complete the thought, is I think too many people go to work thinking that's okay. My IT department, my CISO, everybody else are looking out for me. So anything that comes in, I'll just click on it, because I'm sure if it wasn't smart to do, it'll get caught. Well, we can't do that at home, as was evidenced the other day.
As far as stories go, that's a story that I hear in almost every organization, that people feel that the IT department is protecting them and they don't really need to know too much about it. And another thing you mentioned there, I thought was really interesting, the fact that you do focus on the mainstream news for stories. It's almost a measure of how relevant stuff will be to the average employee, because if you get stories about Adobe vulnerabilities being cracked in a certain way, like nobody ever hears about those things. It's really the bigger stories that we kind of need to focus on that will resonate with people, I think.
Yeah. I think
Good
that's
point.
just my one comment with kind of mainstream news. You know, sometimes they sensationalize things and blow things up a little bit, and put a spotlight on things. But if we utilize that for good, then I think that that's kind of how we use that mainstream news source. Because I have experience with the education sector and actually teaching students cybersecurity, and one of my constants was using real life news stories at the top of every day to engage conversation and to bring them, into this practicing world of paying attention to what's going on and then trying to solve their problems with real life examples. And then so sharing like that sensationalized news story, about a breach all the way down to just the technical white paper about the same breach, you can kind of see how, one small little mistake ends up becoming a big, large, $65 million ransom to a major hospital. And so those are kind of the things that, you like to be able to present them and then explain and connect the dots. And I think is a great way to educate.
Yeah.
And TikTok, don't forget TikTok. There's a huge amount of stuff. Some of it's quite useful, but I keep an eye on that. I think as well, the other thing I'd just add in, which always saddens me to an extent, is the amount of people from this sector who will happily just dance onto, TV channels and into newsrooms and into print press and talk about things that they actually don't have any experience of, or that they perhaps shouldn't be saying. And it gets very sensationalized. The TikTok situation recently is a very good example of that. We've had people going, "Oh, it's terrible. Oh my God, the world is scaffolding it." And yet they're silent on quite a lot of other things. And I don't think it's helpful, but I do think as professionals, it's helpful for us to be aware of that and to keep an eye on that, because
I think TikTok's a
perfect
perfect example, Michelle. I mean, TikTok, we can all go on for days and years and whatever, talking about, TikTok and the evil of TikTok and data collection and everything else. But why do we focus on just TikTok? Every single social media platform is doing this to our data, and in some worse than, potentially TikTok and foreign state actors being involved. But that's sensationalized. The news has now chosen one enemy and one target because they happen to be owned by a foreign entity. Well, just because, Meta is owned by an American entity, that doesn't make them any safer or better, but we don't sensationalize it and we don't blow it up in the same kind of manner. And I think, so just to your point there, it's how how the news chooses. And then these experts seem to kind of double down on things that, again, they don't necessarily know the complete underpinnings and how things are working. So it's a great point.
Ryan, I think it's brilliant that you bring these mainstream news stories to students. I have a question for you. Do you at any point when you're talking to your students, a story comes up, and do you ever look at them and say, do you ever wonder how this hack happened? I mean, you're looking at this big corporation that was hit or whatever.
Yeah.
Have you ever given any thought to the fact there actually were human beings involved in this, and start to dig into it and say it wasn't maybe a 0-day attack, whether they know what that is or not, which you could obviously explain, but the nut of the whole thing is, at the end of the day, 95% of all cyber attacks have some form of social engineering involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least that's a statistic that gets thrown around pretty regularly.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
How do you translate that news story into your students so they start to say, hey, you know what, that could have been me that did that?
So I start to I pose it back to them and almost kind of like a reverse engineer this, right?
Yeah.
So if we are looking at, we can look at famously, the Sick Kids Hospital ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how did that happen? Right. Because we can sensationalize the fact that, the world's largest, children's hospital was held ransom. But what were the causes of that? What were the effects of that? And how were the people involved in that? And once you start to break that down, then it becomes a process thing. Okay. So now we can identify the gaps, and then you start to actually build out cybersecurity as a whole, because now we can understand the attack vector. We can understand the damage it caused. We can understand, who was responsible for it, and maybe what we can do next time to prevent it. So, that one single news story will then kind of branch out into this kind of a bit of an explosion of learning. I would say it, and you go down these different rabbit holes, and, then it's okay. So is this social engineering? Did a person make a mistake, or did a system make a mistake? And then, and that's where Fleetus comes in as well, because from an ops side, it's like, okay, is it the system is the vulnerability, or is the person the vulnerability? And I think that is very important in security to understand the difference.
I'm wondering when. Sorry,
quick.
Fleet, it's just one quick thing to Ryan's point there. Do we ever go to people and say, as opposed to you being the victim, do you realize you can actually be part of the solution? If you learn more about this and you do the analysis like you're talking about, and to Fleetus as well, respectfully, in your role, I'm sure that if we go back to people on a more positive note and say, you don't have to just be a victim. You don't have to say, well, what do I do about it? So as a cyber attack, you can say, well, if I show you some things, you can actually start to become part of the global solution by being more cyber aware.
Yep.
Sorry,
I
Fleetus.
was going to there is like the mainstream media, and I dropped in here, so I need to clarify the acronym. It's Information Sharing Organization, so ISEX.
Mhm.
I have been blessed and been in organizations where we have taken those feeds that came in 24, 48, 72 hours and already had a deck or a response to our C-level through like a response that we do every week. So when it hits the mainstream news, they already know what we know because we've already told them what's been a few of the TLP, the traffic light protocols. Depending on what level it is, I can start sharing internally. After it's made white or green or whatever, I can start sharing it with the org, but there's different opportunities there. And then to your point, like I go into a lot of situations as a blameless. Leave your title at the door. We're employees. Tell me what you saw, when you saw it, and how you saw it. Like that's the easiest way. So mainstream media of us taking what we get from our 3-letter feeds that we get into our threat intel platforms, that we get from information sharing groups, that we get from podcasts that we talked about, and then being able to give a bulleted list to your CISO who can share it with his peers. Give a bulleted list to your CFO if it's business email compromise related attacks. Being able to respond with a targeted, as we talked before, role-based communication. This role needs to hear this. This role needs to hear that. And you target your audience and you be able to jump in an elevator and you can say exactly what that person needs to hear because that's their role. Nothing more, nothing less. It's concise, and that's where mainstream gives you that opportunity to talk about it, but you have to be prepared to talk about it.
Excellent points, guys. I just wanted to add, so I think it's really interesting that we are starting to focus a little more on the mainstream news than I thought we would in this session, which is great. And I think the process that I typically use if I'm trying to educate a particular team or organization is I look at the mainstream news because those are the things that we just talked about that resonate with people that everybody kind of has heard of, and it's easier to get them to focus on it rather than some obscure thing. But at the same time, most mainstream articles don't include the details that we actually need to help people understand what they should do differently. So I do it in 2 steps. I take the mainstream stories and then I go and find something in Ars Technica or Wired to look more deeply at how it actually happened. And a little protocol I learned, when I was doing risk assessments 15, 20 years ago was you look at the threats, you look at the assets, and you look at the vulnerabilities. And it's the vulnerabilities that typically people can do something about. And so that's really where I try to help people understand, if they can identify those 3 things in a story. And if you can't identify those things when you're telling somebody a story, it's pretty hard to tell them anything about what they should be doing differently or why. And so I just wanted to follow up on that mention from John, who mentioned, it's important to be able to say, what should I do differently after I see this story? Yeah. So really good discussions.
And Chris, just one more point on kind of how we educate students and how I do, specifically, it's to Scott's point, bringing the white papers, bringing the technical science, and then actually do it. Actually try and replicate those exploits and try and show them in real time and how they work. That also puts them on the other side of the fence. If we can do a little bit more of that with our employees to kind of give them this like more of a real world example of how these attacks happen, and then they will start to build that natural resilience and, for next time that they might be able to make a better decision. If we keep just hitting them with the stick, and saying, don't do this, it's not going to make the results and it's not going to move the needle. So I think kind of the sharing, the education, and the exposure is what could change those day-to-day users.
It's also the advice, though. Sorry, I think I was watching the Ashley Madison breach documentary on Disney, and just while it's in my head, that I was really struck by the fact that there was only Danielle Citron on there who really was talking about advice, about people-centered approaches. And I think that's the really big thing that in all of this we're talking about, but we don't often identify the real problem. So every single expert on there, apart from Danielle was saying, I don't know how to help these people. I didn't know what advice to give them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest problem we have, that we focus on, use a password. We tell people, so like you just said, beat them with a stick. And then when it comes to it, when there's actually a problem, we are completely, we don't have a WebMD for cybersecurity, which I still think we should have. I'm happy to help up. I will do the work, but we don't have that, and so people have to go scurrying around for their nation-specific, region-specific help. But even these cybersecurity experts, and some of the people, I use that with air quotes and very advisedly on that, but I know for a fact that some of them were actually mocking victims of that breach. But I'm not getting into that. What I'm saying is, it is really sad to me that when we're talking about news and advice, we should also be talking about the constructive stuff, because when we're dealing with news stories, and that's why I look at the news and TikTok and everything else, because a lot of it is damage limitation. A lot of it is, but it's telling people, well, it's okay. You can actually plug your USB cable into the airport, charging, despite what the FBI has just said. No offense to the FBI, they're great, but I don't think that advisory was meant for you just because you're on holiday in Minneapolis. I don't know. I just think it's. So I think it's giving people the right advice. We are bereft of good advice for people who are in really tight spots. So that's another thing. When we talk about news, we have to talk about constructive advice, because otherwise it's all just, this is the problem. And then, well, what do I do? I don't know.
Yeah. Cool. Well, in the interest of sort of keeping the momentum going, great discussion. Really appreciate it.
It's just something that I think.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Here is for those who watch and some of the channels I'm in and some LinkedIn, is just food for thoughts. Like, you don't have to call it a food for thought, just posing a question about the article, posing a question about the discipline. So like recently I've been talking about like threat intel or your cyber threat intel or your vulnerability management, just letting them think about those terms, and just, even if you don't have a dialogue, just a food for thought post to your employees, to your executives, gets them in the mindset to start thinking about stopping and assessing. Because now they've read a question, it made them assess whatever happened in the article, whatever they heard in the podcast, whatever they heard from the quote expert. Is this really a risk to me and to my org, or is this just hype? So those food for thoughts are good ways of going about how do you digest what you're reading and hearing.
Excellent. So I wanted to just highlight something that's interesting. So we do, I think I'm sharing the poll results right now, and we'll do a quick run through it. I think, the security portals sort of is the most popular way for people to find good information about the stories. But I'm really glad that, we have had this discussion and that there are people thinking about the mainstream news and how it's relevant to people. And then in the second question, what form does your organization share the stories, training content, regular newsletters as needed, or other methods such as actually, that we have had a whole bunch of comments in chat that I haven't had a chance to go through, but nobody said that they don't share stories, so that's good. And then in the third question, it was, what do you use your news sources for? And a lot of people, most people said sharing with employees or teams, which I think is great. A lot less people said sharing with leadership, and I think Michelle touched on the importance of that, but it has to be done in a way that obviously will be valuable and respect their time and their level of thinking, but also personal knowledge too. So those are really interesting results. I hope people get some value out of that. But I wanted to also contrast that with what I'm sharing on the screen right now, which is we did a poll on LinkedIn a week ago when we announced this session, and mostly it's from people who tend to follow us in the security realm, and almost nobody said mainstream news outlets in that part of the poll. There was 19 votes. Most said security news portals and social sites. Very few said newsletters. So I just think it's really interesting, depending on who you're asking and the broader scope of people. We had about 19 or 20 people in this poll that responded too. So interesting difference. I just wanted to share some information with people in case you're interested. Where are the places that we tend to get information? I got some input from some of the panelists. So in terms of mainstream, there's obviously the major networks like CNBC and Forbes. There are technology press or industry journals like Bleeping Computer, Ars Technica, Wired, Business Insider, that tend to focus a little more sometimes on the technical side of things if they can, and provide really good, deeper explanations of where things went wrong, and you can pull out pieces, but you have to work at it to create something. Similarly with threat or security portals, like the ones I'm showing here, they also do a good job of providing a little more information, maybe not quite as technical. We also have security podcasts. I happen to be a host on the Shared Security podcast and hope you listen to that one too. But there's definitely ones that are I often hear: Risky Business, Smashing Security. I'll ask the panel if they have any others that they want to mention as well. Newsletters from SANS, Freedom of the Press, Kim Zetter, and then social sites like Twitter, Mastodon, and Reddit are all good ones. Anybody have any other sources you want to mention while we're on the topic of specific sources?
I'll mention one real quick because it goes with it, is the SANS Internet Storm Center. They do like a 5 to 7 minute recapping the previous news stories for the previous day. Small plug there. Johannes does a great job of picking 3 to 5 stories and just recapping them, giving you links, and you can start your day by just listening to it. I mean, there's longer ones out there, but that's a good one to start with because you can see what's getting traction from the Internet Storm Center because they've got honeypots. They're watching for this data. So I recommend
Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's Security 404 Not Found, which is really good. I love it. Anna's one of the hosts on that. She's brilliant. And then I love Security Cryptography, whatever, because it gets into the weeds with some technical stuff that I do not understand half the time, but I love it. And
Yeah.
then also the Cyber Ranch podcast is also pretty nice too.
I just saw one in the chat there too. Alana reminded me of. That's Gerald Auger every morning does a great 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern kind of daily cyber brief. And so basically he just does like a live stream, like lots of energy. You know, I always encourage my students to go there and follow along because it kind of captures their attention a little bit. And there's some sensationalization in there. There's always some a little bit of fun in there, but it's a different type of way to consume. And I think that's important when you're kind of finding your team. It's, again, we have to talk to all of our teams in different ways, and some people are going to be receptive to different types. Some will just love to read PDFs and white papers, but some love that YouTube channel or the TikTok feed or whatever, and everyone has a different way to learn. So I think it's having this this good collection is nice.
Also, don't forget Hidden Brain and Ethical Voices. I love those because I do think that a lot of the stuff that it comes out of other sectors, particularly psychology, human behavior, and just generally, you have a lot of people on from PR and other organizations. We have a lot to learn from other sectors, and it can help you as well to especially communicate upwards or even outwards.
Yeah, the psychology side of things, Michelle, is something that we really haven't talked about at all. And from an awareness point of view, humans.
Oh, I've got results if you want them. I put them all in my newsletter every
well, there's a tip about a future episode. We will be having a psychology-focused episode on the psychology of phishing simulations. So stay tuned.
Oh, please no.
And Michelle, you know who we're going to have on for that too. So
I'll just be screaming into the pillow. It'll be fine.
That'll be the entertainment for the show. So yeah. All right. Let's move on to the open section. We've got another 18 to 20 minutes. Just some other topics that we may or may not have talked about, but I wanted to suggest and throw out there. And if we've already beaten them to death, we can move on. But I think this is a good point for inviting Chris to maybe tell the story that he's thinking about. Just want to share, some of the recent stories that people find most useful for security awareness. So Chris, did you want to brief us a little bit on the situation that you had?
I'll make it quick. This didn't hit the news, although it has hit the news many times. I got a call from someone who's I'm very close to, and when the call came in, I could hear this screaming in the background. I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought maybe it was a 911 type call. Turned out she was sitting in front of her computer, and it got locked up. And this woman was screaming at her that they had taken over her computer, and that she was not in any way, shape, or form supposed to try to turn it off. She did that, she would destroy her computer forever. And that here was the phone number, and she needed to let somebody on the computer, and they'd fix it. So I said, when did this come in? She said, well, I actually had it the other day, and my computer got locked up and the number came up and I called them, and what the message was, this is Microsoft and there's a problem on your system, blah, blah, blah. And here's the number and call and we'll fix it. So she did and got on and let this person on her system for some period of time. And then it was a few days, 2 days later, this happened where the woman came on screaming at her that, she had to let them back on the system, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, she called me in a panic. And I said, well, go ahead and turn the system off. She said, I can't. This woman's, and I can hear the woman screaming in the background at her that if she turns the computer off, her computer life will end. So anyway, I got it turned off and stepped her through some things and loaded up some basic secure Windows Defender, different things like that she didn't have on her system. At any rate, what I found really interesting was a day later, she got a phone message and it came up and it said it was Norton, and it was Norton calling to say that she needed to put Norton on her system. This came in on her phone, which is kind of interesting. And they gave a phone number. Ironically, it was the same phone number as the one that had been put up on her computer screen. So we stepped through that little conversation, and they only wanted $399 for a basic version of Norton, which of course you can pick up for $59 or whatever. But to the point, I've heard of this happening before. I've just never had firsthand experience about it. And I think these are the types of things, somehow, some way, if we could get this out into mainstream in news, if you would, it's great when we talk about the security portals and everything else, but the average person obviously never goes to those. So I'm finding that this is becoming more and more of an issue. And I am going to do something to see if I can get something out in the media relatively soon on this story, because it's not unique. Mm-hmm. And it's taking down a lot of particularly older people. I'm not saying that derisively, but people that just have, they're either nervous. I will just finish with one interesting thing. While the person was on her computer and he was talking back and forth to her, she thought something was odd as he started bouncing around doing different things. And she said, I should tell you, I have no banking information. I have no credit card information. I have nothing on this computer. And there was dead silence at the other end. And he only stayed on for another few minutes. She said, I don't do online banking. And he basically hung up.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It sounds very much like something I just posted in the chat. There's a guy named Kit Boga. I don't know if any of you guys have seen. He's got a YouTube channel, and all he does all the time is what I call scam baiting, where he basically victimizes the scammers. And it's something we all wish we could do, right? Just to waste their time and
well, it's something I did about 2 months ago when I got early in the morning, I get a text. Actually, when Scott is in Japan, I get a text from Scott saying, hey, you got to run out and get me some gift cards. The typical gift card. Yes, I still did work that day, but I also did draw that out for about 9 hours. I was just about to provide those gift card numbers. I even generated Apple gift card numbers and sent them to the scammer in hopes of him trying to validate them, which he did. And eventually ended. Yeah. So Scott, you never got your gift cards. My apologies.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. That contest didn't work.
But the cool thing,
actually, there was a man in the middle, Ryan. He redirected them to me.
Excellent, Chris. Well, I enjoy my $500 Apple gift cards that I bought.
Michelle?
I think it would be really, to Chris's point, we have touched on this in previous webinars, but I think it's increasingly urgent to get this kind of information out to people, to teach them how to be politely rude, to teach them how to, we're not doing enough. And people talk about, I know because I used to work in education a lot, people think that there's a lot of information out there for consumers and for people who are at risk, but there's not actually. And I think especially with the use of AI now, with all these deep fakes, I think it's, like you say, it's not even a lot of money. They're not asking for a lot of money, but that's a lot of money if you've got 100 people. If I had 100 people giving me £300 tonight, I'd be happy, right? And then they're going to do it again tomorrow. Like, by the way, I'm not going to do that for the benefit of the tape or the FBI who might be listening. I'm not, but it is incremental, because everybody is in financial pain at the moment, and we're not talking about that enough. I was talking to somebody else today about the trauma that people are living through. Everybody has some level of trauma, and I don't think that's too strong a word to use. And so that goes for the scammers as well. They're getting increasingly desperate, so they will be coming to you much more than they'll go to your employer. I don't think we're addressing that enough. And like I've seen much more stuff on TikTok that's been helpful than I have coming out of the information security sector.
Yeah.
Just so I mean, I haven't seen many companies that do that. I've seen a lot of companies say, "Oh, but we only want it to relate, the advice we give to relate to work devices or work accounts." That doesn't work for people. I don't care. I don't care, honestly. I care about my grandparents or my phone. I don't care as much about my work one if I'm a normal, average working person.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Off of Chris's story, I posted a link that some people in the chat will recognize from a training that is done outside of here that they may have taken. This is the PayPal scam. And not the traditional PayPal scam, the PayPal scam where they legitimately send you a valid invoice. Like it is a valid. So if you log into your PayPal account, you will actually have the $5.99 for Norton or Trend Micro or whatever. And they win either way. You either pay it. So they get the 80-year-old woman who says, I need to pay this because I have this on my box. Or how they really get you is in the email invoice from PayPal. It's not PayPal's number. It's PayPal's randomly generated phone number that calls the adversary. When you get the adversary, they walk through the steps of using a forget password. So they validate, is this the last four of your phone number, which they can get from clicking forget password. So it makes them get some credibility. Then they send you the one-time code. If you read the message, it says reset password versus validation. So you have to get someone to read the text message to know that. So I walked a family member through this scam the other week. I thought it would never happen to us so personally. And then this video was shared in a training that I shared with you. But how much money they make, because they're only asking for a couple $100 to Michelle's part. So you either just pay it just to get it out of your way. You're just like, oh, I forgot about that. I'll just pay this invoice and keep going. Or you call them and they lock you out of your PayPal account. And if you've got your bank account tied to it, which if you've got your bank account, be very careful, and not a credit card because they'll drain your bank account. So,
yep. So great points, guys. Just wanted to throw up a couple of examples that we sort of documented in advance. There's one we covered in the Shared Security Show about a year ago about a social engineering kill chain. The story mentioned, but it was more along the lines of a phone scam that was conducted on a construction company that was impersonating a supplier and got them to actually pay a fair bit of money. Trying to convince somebody that they owed money or the project couldn't start, and it was very convincing. So I want to include that a link to that in hopefully that QR code takes you there. There's also a story. It's a smaller story than the whole MoveIt vulnerability and ransomware, associated ransomware. This one was one I put in the newsletter, the LinkedIn newsletter today, which is really just about a college, Colorado State University, that was hit. And I think 20-some thousand, actually, I didn't even say yet how many people, but there's a lot of personal information exposed as a result of this vulnerability. And it was more of a technical vulnerability on the application security side. But we also have to educate, application developers as well, as going back into that role-based security we talked about last week. So we can gather a variety of stories that are not just all about privacy breaches. Or about scams like social engineering. We can sort of tailor them. So those are a couple that I pointed out. Michelle mentioned just, the LastPass breach in general. There's a whole lot of different stories, different angles on that. Anything you want to mention on that, Michelle?
No, I just thought it was, none of these, I didn't like it. I just thought it was interesting because they got him on his, I think it was them on their home device. I thought that was very relevant.
Perfect.
That LastPass, that happened 3 times, did it not?
Yeah, and I think it's also because it was a lot of social engineering, and also I think it was just sad that it was a security product as well, because there's a whole lot in there. I'm not here to be shaming or criticizing any individual company, of course, because it could happen to anybody tomorrow. So, but it's just, there's
there are a lot of angles that could be used for education in the LastPass story, for sure.
And I'm sure they'd want us to use, that's what a lot of the breach disclosures are very good, aren't they? That's what I like, when they don't just say it was a sophisticated attack. The Twilio disclosure is actually probably the best one I've read in a long time.
Scott,
because they didn't blame the individual.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing, and I'm sure our panelists would agree on this, I make a point of letting people know that these people are doing these attacks, whether it's LastPass to their defense or anybody else. These are not 15-year-old people sitting on a bed cross-legged with a laptop being script kiddies and having fun trying to hack in. And the one thing that I make very clear is, unlike any other industry in the world, the one thing sophisticated cyber criminals will do, and many of them are, 10-time PhD level brains as far as computers and whatever, is they share information. So with over the better part of 4.5 billion people around the world and organizations using computers, if they have a successful attack, or it isn't successful but almost successful, they'll put that up in the dark web in a heartbeat, and they'll share it with other cyber criminals, because there's enough targets out there. The target pool is so big. It's not like, gee, if I tell somebody how I just got into XYZ company, then that ruins me ever getting money again. It's the opposite. And they work together, they share code, it's a badge of honor, etc. And so for companies like LandPass, good, bad, or indifferent, they got hit 2 or 3 times. As smart as they are, there's a whole battalion of cyber criminals globally that may say, gee, I went into LandPass, oh, they fixed that block or that vulnerability, and guess what? I was able to get in again, and this is what I did. And all of a sudden, this cyber world out there is getting smarter and smarter. So no other industry in the world, to my knowledge, does that. Drug companies don't call each other up and say, hey, look what I just did, or whatever.
The knowledge sharing is quite extreme. And Chris and others, have you actually seen the basically the call centers that are now set up in various nations, right? I mean, it's a sophisticated game. To your point, it's not random attacks. It's not just someone hoping for the best and spraying and script kiddies. These are people that get jobs, like you would in a call center. You show up to your first day at work, you get your full training, and then you have your you have a manager who follows your KPIs. You have to be producing money for the larger organization, and this is how organized crime works. And these call centers are thousands of people on thousands of computers networked in, sharing data in real time, going after their victims. And it's no different. They're getting fed email addresses, they're getting fed Facebook profiles, they're getting fed attack vectors, and their job is to exploit you. And they don't care who you are and how much they get, because they just immediately move on to the next target. And this is, these are the things that are happening widespread in a lot of countries around the world. And that's why it's hard for us to stay ahead of it, because for every one of us who's willing to stand here and talk about it, there's 1,000 of them right now clicking, on those buttons to attack one of us. And so there's the kind of the disconnect.
Yeah. So to Ryan's point, again, I'm the operations guy, so I've had the pleasure, I'm going to use pleasure, of actually calling one of those call centers. They make you feel warm and fuzzy. They literally ask, do you want to be talked to in Spanish, English, French, German? They get you on the phone, they offer, they console you, they say, everything's going to be fine. Like, they're a salesman. Like, they get you. I've listened to these calls. I've been on one of them just to see, and they transfer you through, they walk you through getting your Bitcoin wallet set up, they fund it. They help you troubleshoot if you have issues, while at the same time, like, giving affirmation the entire time. They're not yelling. They're not getting irate. They're literally like some of the best customer service you'll ever see is coming from your threat actors. And
there's a comment that really wants to be made here when you just said that, but I won't. There's companies could learn about customer service.
We need them to work with the airlines. That's the thing. I feel like the airlines need them.
For any of our Canadian listeners, we've all called Rogers or Bell before for customer service, right? So I mean, or Verizon or T-Mobile or Orange or whatever your carrier is, Claro, I'll name them all. But we've all called our telecom for support. And I think we all need to have our radar up that if the support we're getting is better than our telecom, chances are it's a scam.
But that's the point, isn't it? That they're so horrible. InfoSec people can be really horrible. Like 98% of the free work that I've done in the 10 years I've been in this sector has been because some InfoSec rock star who goes on a Netflix or a Disney documentary and talks about stuff, and then goes on the TV or everything, and then gets millions of emails, will actually refuse to help. But the cyber criminals, they'll be nice to you. So actually, maybe if we were a little bit nicer, because I walk into rooms all the time, and people are offensive and unfriendly and judgmental, and they laugh. People click on links all the time. They're so stupid. And what do you expect? That's why all of this is so good and so effective, because they can't get that warmth and that nice and niceness isn't a word, but it's
Well,
like,
no, especially if we keep using the stick. If we're all using the stick, and like if Fleetus used the stick all the time, and instead of the
I've
carrot,
seen it. He
it
does.
would turn right. And then the alternative is the threat actors are using nothing but kindness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just, it's human nature. It just takes care of the problem, creates itself. So yeah, I think more compassion. I think to Michelle's point, and understanding, and stop with the blame. I think that would be,
I would
good
love
start.
to see that. I would love to see that.
I'd like
Yeah.
open up with, we have to get to a blameless mindset. So like, I've shared this on other calls. I've shared this and stuff I've posted. It's, you're my peer. You're my friend. You're my colleague. You're not the weakest link. You're not, to Michelle's point, the idiot who clicked on the ID10T error, who clicked on this. You are literally a colleague who's here to help this business run, to earn money, or whatever your task is to create that widget. And if I walk into a room with that hot mindset as the security operations manager, practitioner, professional, you're going to listen to me. And when I share my faults, I clicked on a phishing email last month. Here's how I know. Here's what I did. Here's how I told my team. I want you to isolate me until we can verify this.
Yeah.
Like, humble yourself and say, I've even fallen because I'm multitasking, or I was on the phone with a nice customer service person who made me feel nice, warm, and fuzzy. I started typing things in, and before I clicked submit, I realized I was being scammed.
Yeah. Leveling with them and kind of comparing it to, with them as well. I mean, I'm a horrible cook, and, but I try. When I make a mistake in the kitchen, my wife doesn't like run me out of the kitchen with a knife. In fact, she's actually just put nicer labels on things so I don't make a mistake, right? And I use the right spice. It's a small analogy, but if we enacted that in the workplace for phishing and all these different threats that are coming up, it might actually go a long way. So I thought Michelle would like that one.
I know, just as the bar is below the Earth's crust, isn't it? That we're not running each other out of kitchens with knives. So
Great imagery. I love it. Anyway, just to pay some bills, folks, I apologize, but I've got to sort of just mention ClickArmor, the sponsor for our series. It's basically a gamified security awareness training platform that is highly interactive, visually dynamic, unlike anything you've seen before. And it's not just games. It's really designed to make security awareness training more enjoyable and easier for employees to go through and complete, and actually put them in situations that are real. And I threw up this screenshot from one of our lessons called Fakes and Frauds, which is taking people through scenarios like the scam phone call that's trying to get you to download a security patch, and people get to choose some action through that, sort of choose your own adventure. Anyway, I just wanted to give you guys a little flavor about what we do at ClickArmor, and we do really appreciate people coming to these sessions and hope you get some value out of them. So I'll leave it at that, and I guess we'll move on to our next question, which is really about how do you actually present real news stories to employees in your security awareness program. We talked a little bit about that in the poll, and some of them were going to different places, like to the leadership or to the team. Maybe you guys could just focus a little bit of the discussion around how this information is used.
Oh, I'll go ahead and say, like, I go with the human OS, the human centric. How does this apply to you as a person? Like, think about it from a persona of, I'm the father in this situation, I'm the husband in this situation, I'm the grandfather in this situation, or grandmother, sister, whatever. And how would you respond to? I think might have been, I don't remember who said earlier, Chris, like at home, how do you decide when to open the front door? Like, how do you know when to turn the stove off? Like, there's some learning you've done. You reflect on your instincts, on your knowledge of your experiences. Do the same thing in cyber. When you read the article, use what you've learned, what you've lived, the life experiences you've had is the best way to apply this to your employees and to your peers. Is we have instinct, we have knowledge, we have experience. You do it day to day. You decide the risk of tying your shoe. You decide when to open your front door. You know when to use Ryan's analogy, when to use this type of knife and this fork when cooking. You've just got experience. And that applies to security. Like, when do I click on a link? When do I not? When do I download? When do I just preview? Like, even simply between previewing something and downloading something, there's intuition that comes in of just previewing versus downloading.
Mm-hmm. Earlier on, Alana made a good point in the chat how she uses the news story. So she grabs a few minutes with the CISO in kind of a weekly call, and then is able to present one or two kind of news stories that way. So it's, again, these little little tidbits every now and then. It's just keeping these things relevant, keeping them, at the, I guess the forefront would be, a solid way to do this. So to your point, Felitas, hopefully then you can kind of inspire your team to then take that in, right? We can all present information, but I think we also need to talk to our teams and help them understand why we're presenting the information and what they can kind of critically do with it. And I think those are kind of the next steps leaders can take to try and help with the journey. Because if we're the security champions, to another point in the chat, we need to be the ones that are kind of, going forward with this information. But also let's fill in the context of why, I'm giving you this information, why I think this is important, and what you can do with it, and how you can make a change.
All right. I'm going to just go to one last question that might be insightful for people to understand. So how do you know if stories are helping employees or not? You might be spewing out stories left, right, and center, but do you know if people are actually understanding them?
You ask them.
Yes.
Sorry.
To Michelle's point, it's the security culture. We keep throwing culture around. I mean, I think it was on this call. We don't have like security awareness. What am I supposed to be aware of? Like getting past just the aware piece. What is the culture supposed to be? Like see something, say something, stop and assess. Or they're eager to come running and tell you, hey, I read this today. Did you know about this? They're coming to you with excitement about a news article or something they learned or something they applied, or my kids stopped and didn't buy $1,000 worth of Minecraft plugins today.
Oh God, that made my palms sweat actually thinking about my kids on the internet. Yeah, I think it really depends. I think it's just asking them, and what they people are very once they know they can be safe with you. If you create that safe space, they will say, "I like this," or "We don't really want that." And I think it's much more the case, certainly for the organizations I work with, that the security type, the harder, more in-depth security news will go upwards with insight and a couple of lines about it, and then or a short paragraph, and then the more consumer news, the stuff they're going to have seen on TikTok. Yes, you can plug your USB in. Yes, TikTok is okay if you just do this, this, and this, and all the rest of it, because that's the kind of thing that they will see, and then they will start asking questions about, or they might get. I find there's a lot of fear that's propagated, from the news and from people who go on there. So it's about balancing that. Generally, they'll come back and tell you, won't they? So
awesome. We're well over an hour, but I'm happy to keep going. I do want to share one piece of information for anybody that has to leave in the next minute or two. We have scheduled the next session. Again, we're trying to keep this on a 2-week cadence now, so people can kind of put it in their calendar and just to remember to show up. So August 9th, we're going to do session 25. We mentioned carrots and sticks. So good prescient discussion today, motivating employees in security awareness programs. So hopefully that QR code will take you to the Zoom registration page where you can just get registered right away, and then you'll get reminders, etc. So I just wanted to let people know that. And also, ClickArmor does have a quick start bundle for Security Awareness Month, which is coming up. I was on a call this week with the Government of Canada's kickoff for Security Awareness Month, Get Cyber Safe Canada. And they reminded us it's only 10 weeks until October, and which doesn't seem long now. But just to let people know, for $99, we have a special package that you can get that's normally $4.99, and it will give you 4 3-minute challenges for Security Awareness Month. They're gamified, they're easy to deploy, and they just add a different dimension to your awareness program. So now, just to sort of wrap things up, if anybody has any thoughts about, anything we've covered today that is really important for executives to know about security stories that we want to share, any insights that you guys can remember from our discussion today?
I mean, I'll start first. I mean, for the individuals, we'll just start with individuals. Is like we talked about, like, remember you're their peer. So ask the security team, I have questions. And then as a security practitioner, or the implementers here, is be willing to have those conversations, clear your schedule, answer the Slack message, the Teams message. And then for the executives, empower your users to do knowledge sharing. Like, put it in your newsletter, allow those 5-minute conversations at your all hands in your podcast and your newsletter. So your executives can empower the individual contributor to have a voice. The implementers, your security awareness, can give them the opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to talk more about this. I'd like you to teach me more about this. And then the individuals themselves is just being empowered and comfortable to see something, say something, and to talk about what they're reading and learning.
Excellent. Any thoughts, Michelle?
Oh, so many, but I think it's the advice after the news, isn't it? What advice are we giving them? Not just this is the story, it's what do you do? Because I saw something the other day saying about the so what. You've got to give them the so what.
Yeah. And it's really easy to just share a story and not provide insights or useful, actionable information about them, right? So it takes a little bit more effort to do that. And so that's, I think, what we want to invite implementers, managers to do, so that we can do that targeting for executives, for individuals, and for the team. All right.
Yeah, I think something that Fleetus has talked about too, it can't be emphasized enough, and Michelle also made reference to it. If there's a cyber event that takes place, Fleetus walks in the room, he's the expert, he's trained, Michelle, whatever, Ryan, and I think there's a fear factor immediately from those that have been victimized about, oh, they're here. It's like the FBI walking into your room and you think, oh boy, I'm going to get grilled, I'm going to get told, I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get whatever. That whole humanness that both of you were referring to in particular, come in and say, hey, I am the expert, please understand, this is what I do, you do what you do, but the only way I can help is if we have a conversation, and I just need to find some things out. First of all, don't back up against the wall, don't be afraid, it's not like you did something wrong here. And even if you did do something that compromised the organization, let's not address that fact right now, because I'm sure you didn't sit there and do it on purpose. So let's find out what happened. Let's find out where the flaws are in our systems within the organization. And by the way, particularly to Felice's point, I make sure that I let people know that these things have happened to me as well. So it's not because I'm the expert in this that I know so much more than you, and you're dumb and you shouldn't have done it. And I think just sort of diffusing that fear factor of, oh, here comes the CISO or whomever it is, and am I ever in trouble and I'm going to get fired at the end of this conversation?
And it's not an indication of weakness in your leadership to admit weakness, that you make mistakes and things like that. People will start to trust you more and be more vulnerable to you too.
But I mean, we wouldn't blame our staff for doing a fire drill wrong, right? Seriously, if the fire alarm went off and 99% of your staff were in at the front door, but someone went out the back door because that was their decision, would you literally zero them out and make them feel bad for doing that? Or would you try and educate them that, this is the fire safety route, this is the plan, and next time maybe just make that decision differently, right? Like there's so many real life examples that are out there that every day we're doing better. But when it comes to security, it seems that we completely, sometimes as leaders and executives in it, we completely forget these lessons, and we're just like, we're too afraid of it. And I think if we become less afraid of it, then we can kind of normalize it and not stop with the blame and everything else. So I think we're all kind of on the same page. I say just ask questions, pass on the knowledge you have, and try and give context when you give information.
All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody joining us, both in the audience and in the panel. Really good discussions, I think, very valuable and hopefully useful for people putting together their programs or even just sharing stories with their family and friends. So until Wednesday, August 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern, hope everybody stays well and secure. So we'll talk to you next time.
I'll be in America for that. That's exciting. I'll be on your time zone.
Well, you'll have to come and visit.
Do you know, if I come over there, I'm not going to go home.
For sure.
Oh.
Just to get me out of here. I always think about that.
We keep wanting to be in San Francisco. You keep showing.
I know. If you speak it into existence, it'll happen. I want to get back. Well, somewhere, anywhere, actually. I've been thinking about Australia, actually, because I've been told there's not as many spiders north of Brisbane. I don't know whether that's a lie. That could be a lie.